The wind cut like a razor through the alleys of the forgotten neighborhood. Sofia hugged her frail body to her chest, trying to retain what little warmth remained in her old wool coat. The streets were silent, except for the distant sound of cars and the echo of drops dripping from rusted gutters. She was returning from the bakery with a stale loaf of bread wrapped in newspaper. It was all she could offer her mother on that freezing night. As she walked, she noticed a subtle movement in the alley ahead. A boy, with torn clothes and bare feet, shivered on the damp ground. His eyes, wide and frightened, stared at her with a mixture of fear and despair. Sofia felt her heart tighten. For a moment, she considered continuing, pretending not to see like everyone else did. But she couldn't. The cold seemed more cruel when it was the other person who felt it. She approached slowly, without startling the boy. "Are you alone?" she asked shakily. He just shook his head, trying to hold back tears. Sofia looked down at the coat covering her, the only one she had, and took a deep breath. She took it off her shoulders, ignoring the shiver that ran through her body, and placed it over the boy. "Now you'll be warm," she said with a slight smile, though the wind was already biting her bare arms. The boy tried to respond, mumbling something about how cold she would feel, but Sofia shook her head, insisting, "The cold passes, but we mustn't let our hearts freeze." He watched her for a few seconds, as if etching that face into his memory. Sofia got up and left, unaware that that simple gesture had just changed two destinies. Back in the tenement, her mother was waiting for her with bread and a tired but loving look. "God will bless you, my daughter," she said, noticing she was without her coat. Sofia smiled, hugging her mother, and replied, "I don't need a coat, Mom. I have your embrace." That night, as the wind blew through the windows, a silent peace enveloped the simple room, and Sofia fell asleep, unaware that the universe was already beginning to move in her favor. What if you were in her place? A simple gesture, a coat, and an entire life about to change. If you believe that kindness can still transform the world, subscribe to the channel now, because here, every story warms the heart of whoever listens. The next morning, the neighborhood woke up to the news spreading across radio and television. The businessman's grandson, Ricardo Silva, one of the most influential men in the country, had disappeared. The boy was last seen near the city center, wearing simple, unmarked clothing. Sofia heard the news at the bakery, unaware that the boy they were talking about was the same one she had given her coat to. Meanwhile, at the Silva mansion, despair was taking over. Ricardo, a widower and hardened by life, shouted orders to the security guards, blaming everyone for the loss. The boy, Daniel, was all that remained of his deceased daughter, and her absence reopened old wounds. Men searched the streets, helicopters circled overhead, and the name Silva dominated the headlines. But no one imagined that the little girl's salvation lay hidden in the cold alleys of the outskirts.
3 days later, a group of volunteers found him sleeping in a makeshift shelter, an old coat covering his body. In the pocket was a small, handwritten tag, Sofia, 14. It was this detail that changed the course of the search. Local police traced the origin of the name and, with the help of social workers, reached the tenement where Sofia lived. When Ricardo appeared at the door, the contrast between his expensive suits and the humble surroundings was almost poetic. He looked at the girl, thin, shy, with a pure gaze, and understood without words what had happened. Sofia simply confirmed the gesture, saying that anyone would have done the same. But Ricardo knew that wasn't true. That girl had given him what many adults never would, the only shelter she had. A respectful silence filled the small room as he thanked her, deeply moved. That night, Richard returned home with his grandson in his arms and a new restlessness in his heart. For the first time in many years, he thought that perhaps the wealth he had built would be worthless if he couldn't produce gestures like that girl's. And it was there, amidst his golden silence, that he decided to change Sofia's destiny, never imagining that she would change his even more. The following days were strangely peaceful for Sofia. She had returned to her usual routine, helping her mother and studying when she could. She still felt cold, but something inside her warmed her. Perhaps it was the memory of the boy and the look of gratitude he left behind. What she didn't know was that on the other side of town, a powerful man couldn't stop thinking about her. Ricardo Silva reviewed the cameras, the reports, and most importantly, the coat labeled Sofia. He determined to meet her in person, not out of charity, but out of genuine gratitude. When his black car stopped in front of the tenement, all the neighbors came out to see. Sofia was absent-mindedly sweeping the sidewalk when a security guard approached and asked to speak to the girl in the coat. She was confused until she saw the man in the suit approaching with a serious but warm expression. "Are you Sofia?" Ricardo asked, his voice deep and emotional. Sofia nodded shyly. Ricardo told her that the boy she had helped was his grandson, and that if not for her gesture, he would probably have died of cold. The words sounded like a distant dream. Sofia, surprised, simply replied, "I just did what anyone would do." But the businessman shook his head. "No, my dear. Few would do what you did." Sofia's mother, Doña Marta, served coffee in peeling cups, visibly embarrassed by the presence of this important man in her simple home. But Ricardo treated them both with respect and tenderness. For the first time, someone valued them not for what they had, but for who they were. He took in the small room, the peeling walls, and Sofia's sincere smile, and felt a lump in his throat.
Before leaving, Ricardo left a card on the table. "Sofia, I want to offer you something," he said, "not as payment, but as a way of gratitude. I want to give you the chance the world may have denied you." She was speechless as his car disappeared down the dirt road. That night, Sofia couldn't sleep. For the first time, she feared not poverty, but what the future might bring. 2 days later, Ricardo returned, this time without security, without formalities. He brought only an envelope and a lighter smile. Inside was a proposal to pay for Sofia's studies, provide housing in his home, and guarantee a quality education. "You saved what I love most," he said. "Allow me to help you save your own destiny." Sofia looked at her mother, uncertain. Doña Marta held her hand firmly. "Daughter, go. The good you did is coming back." Sofia accepted, but with a broken heart. On the morning of her departure, she hugged her mother tightly, promising to write every day. The bus that took her to the upscale neighborhood seemed to cross worlds, from the dirt streets to the marble avenues. When the mansion's gate opened, Sofia froze. The garden seemed like a piece of another planet, and the sound of the fountains echoed like music from another time. Ricardo welcomed her kindly, showing her every room, every detail. Everything was impeccable, but Sofia felt the chill of human distance. Daniel, the boy she had saved, ran to her and hugged her tightly, smiling like someone reunited with an angel. "I missed you," he said, and Sofia realized that, somehow, she had gained a new brother. The following days were spent adjusting. Private tutors, new clothes, etiquette rules, and silent dinners. Sofia tried to fit in, but with every bite of a sophisticated dish, she remembered the bread she'd shared with her mother. Sometimes she hid in the garden to breathe the fresh air, away from appearances. Daniel was her only refuge. He saw her not as a guest, but as a friend. Ricardo watched from afar, awed by the girl's humility. There was something about Sofia that made him rethink his own choices, something pure and incorruptible.
One cold night, when he saw her covering Daniel with a blanket on the couch, he smiled. The gesture was the same one that had started it all. In that moment, Ricardo realized that perhaps the greatest lesson wasn't what he could teach her, but what she would yet teach him. The next morning, Sofia awoke to the sound of birds and the scent of flowers she had never smelled before. The room was immense, the mattress soft, the curtains swaying in the wind. But despite the comfort, she missed the noise of the tenement and the smell of the simple coffee her mother made. As she descended the stairs, she was greeted with curious glances. Servants and housekeepers eyed her with disdain. To them, she was an intruder in a world that didn't belong to her.
Ricardo tried to lighten the mood, introducing her to the team as the girl who saved Daniel. Even so, expressions remained cold. Sofia, humble, thanked everyone for every meal and every kind gesture, unaware that this bothered those who had lived there for years. At the table, the silence was as heavy as the crystal in the glasses. Daniel, however, smiled whenever she appeared, making the dinners less chilly. Her days became a routine of studying and manners lessons. Private tutors came to teach her etiquette, languages, and history. Sofia learned quickly, but she felt suffocated. The difficult words and elaborate mannerisms of others seemed far removed from what she knew. At night, she wrote letters to her mother, even though she knew she wouldn't always receive a reply. "Everything shines here, but I miss our light," she wrote in one letter. In the garden, Sofia found her refuge. She liked to sit under the trees and watch the sky, imagining that from somewhere her mother could see that same sunset. It was there that Ricardo approached her one day and asked if she was happy. "I'm trying, sir," she replied sincerely. He fell silent, surprised by her honesty. Daniel became her constant companion. He told stories, showed her toys, and sometimes just sat beside her in silence. There was a bond between them that couldn't be explained, a bond forged by the cold and warmed by kindness. Sofia, even within golden walls, remained the same girl who gave without expecting anything. And that was what began to awaken something new in Ricardo, a kind of love that wasn't of blood, but of soul. Over time, Sofia began studying at an elite school at Ricardo's request. The first day was a test of courage. Upon entering the classroom, she heard giggles and whispers. "Look, she's Silva's protégé," a classmate mocked. Others stared at her as if she were a misplaced piece. Sofia lowered her head, trying to ignore it, but the pain was inevitable. It was difficult to belong to a world that seemed to reject her with every false smile. Even so, she didn't give up. She studied diligently, helped her classmates with their homework, and won over some teachers with her humility and intelligence. Gradually, some began to admire her, though others remained envious. Daniel, who studied in a different shift, was her greatest encouragement. When she returned sad, he would always say, "They don't know what courage is, Sofia." At home, the pressure was also mounting. Ricardo's aunt, a bitter and proud woman, kept insinuating that Sofia was there for her own gain. "These stories of kindness are just a facade," she would say as she poured tea. Ricardo never responded, but Sofia's eyes caught every word. What hurt wasn't the contempt, it was the fear of disappointing the man who believed in her. One night, as she walked down the hallway, Sofia heard the servants whispering. "She'll end up inheriting everything," one of them said. "Poor thing, disguised as a princess." Sofia ran to her room, crying silently. She felt the weight of a world that didn't accept her. But through her tears, she remembered her mother's words, "Those who give what they have always have more to give." And she promised that she wouldn't let bitterness change who she was. Unbeknownst to her,
Ricardo heard everything, and each tear from that girl taught him more about humanity than years of wealth. That night, as he watched Sofia fall asleep with a book in her hands, he made a silent promise. He would do everything to ensure she never lost that glow, the same glow that luxury, no matter how hard it tried, could never dim. Time passed with the serenity of an autumn morning. Sofia was now more comfortable with her routine, though she still maintained a simple look in her eyes. Ricardo watched with silent pride as she treated everyone with respect, from the gardeners to the teachers. There was a lightness about her that he had never encountered in the business world. Daniel, growing increasingly attached to the girl, learned the value of small kindnesses simply by being around her. One afternoon, Ricardo invited Sofia to accompany him on a tour of the company. She was amazed by the tall buildings and hurried employees, but what struck her most was the emptiness on their faces. "People here seem sad, even with so much success," he commented. Ricardo smiled wryly. "Maybe because they've forgotten to take pride in the simple things." That sentence remained etched in her mind like a silent seed. At night, while the businessman worked, Sofia wrote a letter to her mother. She told him everything she saw, but always ended with the same longing. "I miss your smell, Mom, the sound of the stove lighting, your bedtime stories." Ricardo once surprised her with the envelope in his hands. "You write from the heart," he said, "and that's what the world needs." Gradually, the bond between them grew stronger. Ricardo began to talk more, laugh more easily, and even go for walks in the garden. Sofia, without realizing it, was healing old wounds in him, those left by the loss of his daughter. He saw in Sofia the same radiance he saw in the girl he had once called his daughter, and this feeling made him fear time as if he wanted to protect her from everything. One cold night, Sofia found Ricardo looking at an old photo. It was of her daughter, smiling beside a little Daniel. He said nothing, but she felt the weight of his pain. Wordlessly, she simply placed her hand on his shoulder. Ricardo took a deep breath and whispered, "You have the same heart she had." In that moment, Sofia realized that destiny had brought together two souls who needed to relearn what it meant to love without losing. The phone rang in the middle of the night. Sofia awoke with a start and ran to answer it. On the other end, a choked voice told her the news no daughter is ready to hear. Doña Marta had passed away. A massive heart attack, they said. The world collapsed in silence. Tears came even before comprehension. The luxurious room seemed to shrink, and the air grew heavy, as if grief had entered through the window. Ricardo entered the room and found her on her knees, cradling the phone. He said nothing, just wrapped her in a firm embrace. Daniel, drowsy, appeared in the doorway and remained silent, understanding that this moment needed no explanation. Sofia couldn't stop repeating her mother's name between sobs and memories. All she wanted was the embrace she would never feel again. On the day of the funeral, Sofia wore a simple dress. The coffin was surrounded by neighbors and friends from the tenement, humble people who spoke of Dona Martha's generosity. Ricardo stood beside her, holding the girl's hand as a father would. With every word, Sofia realized how much her mother had been loved, not for wealth, but for kindness. It was as if her spirit was still there, warming everyone. After the ceremony, Ricardo took Sofia back to the mansion, but she refused to speak. She stayed in the garden until dawn, watching the sky that now seemed more distant. In her heart, a promise began to blossom, to live in a way that would make her mother proud. If she taught me to give what I have, she thought, then I will continue giving, even if it hurts. That night, Ricardo left a letter on the table in her room. Inside, just one sentence. Pain is the price of true love. Sofia cried, but this time her crying was different. It was as if the tears washed away not only the loss, but also the fear. And when the sun rose, she felt something she hadn't expected, the strength to carry on, because inside her was still the warmth of the coat she once offered to another heart. The years passed like leaves blown by the wind. Sofia was now a young woman with a firm posture and a serene gaze. The grief of Dona Marta's loss didn't harden her. It simply honed her sensitivity. She studied diligently, graduated with honors, and began getting involved in social projects, visiting orphanages and public schools. The world of luxury still surrounded her, but it no longer defined her. Ricardo saw in her a mirror of what he always wanted to be, someone who does good without expecting anything in return. Danielle, now a teenager, openly admired her. "You're the strongest person I know," he'd say, as she smiled, changing the subject. Sofia felt proud, but also empty, a feeling of not fully belonging anywhere. One afternoon, during a charity talk, Sofia saw a thin, shy girl hiding a snack in her bag. Instead of scolding her, she approached and discreetly put more food in her bag. "Don't worry, dear. I've had to hide what was rightfully mine, too." The gesture touched those present, but for Sofia, it was simply a natural reflection of what her mother had taught her. Giving is the most beautiful word of love. At night, alone in her room, Sofia looked at an old photo, herself and Dona Marta smiling in the small tenement room. "Mom, I still feel your presence in everything I do," she whispered. Ricardo, who had overheard her, felt a lump in his throat. He knew that this girl was no longer just someone who had helped his grandson. She was part of his family, his heart, and his life. It was then that he began planning for the future. He called his lawyers, reviewed documents, and made a silent decision. He would make Sofia his legitimate heir, not as a favor, but as a recognition of a rare soul. He just didn't imagine that Sofia would see this offer not as a prize, but as a test.
It was a cloudy afternoon when Ricardo called Sofia into his office. The atmosphere was different, more solemn. Documents and folders were piled high on his desk, and the elderly businessman seemed to be carrying an invisible weight. "Sofia," he began, "there's something I need to do before time takes me away. You're the daughter life has given me back, and I want to make sure you lack nothing." She frowned in confusion. Ricardo opened a folder and pushed it toward her. "I want you to know that I've included you in my will. You will inherit part of my fortune and stake in the companies. It's the least I can do for the one who restored my faith." Silence filled the air. Sofia felt her heart race. She looked at the papers, then at the man she'd grown to love as a father. "Mr. Ricardo," she began, her voice breaking, "you gave me something that no amount of money can buy. You gave me a home, dignity, and an education. I don't need anything else." He tried to insist, but she continued firmly. "If you really want to leave me something, donate this money. Use it to change lives as you changed mine." Ricardo remained silent, his eyes welling up. He'd never imagined anyone would turn down a fortune, especially with such conviction. Sofia, seeing his emotion, approached and placed her hand over his. "I don't want to inherit riches. I want to inherit what you taught me, and what my mother taught me, that love is worth more than any mansion." As she left the office, Ricardo stared at the framed coat hanging on the wall, the very one that had started it all. For the first time, he felt truly rich. Sofia wouldn't inherit his money, but she had inherited the best of his heart. And in that moment, they both understood that the greatest legacy anyone can leave is the kindness that outlives us. The news spread like wildfire. "The millionaire's protege refused the inheritance," the headlines read. Journalists camped outside the mansion's gates, and reporters fabricated stories of manipulation and ingratitude. Sofia, who had always avoided the spotlight, was now the center of a storm she never sought. Her every gesture was judged, her every word distorted. The luxury that had once protected her now became a gilded prison. Inside the mansion, the atmosphere grew tense. Ricardo's aunt, bitter and envious, spread venom everywhere. "I warned you, that girl always wanted to promote herself at the expense of the family," she said, sipping her tea. Ricardo tried to suppress the rumors, but the pressure from society was relentless. Sofia endured the silence, but inside she felt suffocated. It was as if the same coldness from when she was a child had returned to cover her heart. Daniel, now nearly an adult, tried to defend her in front of his family. "You don't understand. She didn't refuse out of pride, but out of love," he shouted during a tense dinner. But his words were lost amidst scornful glances and derisive murmurs. Sofia stood up, looked at Ricardo, and said calmly, "I never wanted to be where I don't belong. Maybe it's time for me to return to where my heart still beats freely."
That night, she packed a few things in a backpack. Ricardo went to the gate to try to stop her, but Sofia hugged him and whispered, "You taught me that true wealth is what we do for others. That's what I'm going to seek now." Daniel cried, begging her to stay, but Sofia just caressed his face and smiled. "This isn't a goodbye. It's a new beginning." Seeing the simple car that would take her away, Ricardo felt a strange pang, not of loss, but of pride. He knew he couldn't stop the girl who had given him new meaning in life. When the gate closed, the mansion felt colder than ever. Inside, the framed coat still hung on the wall, reminding him that some gestures are eternal, even when people are gone. The bus crossed the city under a light rain. Sofia looked out the window at the streets she once knew, now different, grayer. She reached her old neighborhood and got off, smelling the familiar smell of bread and wet earth. The tenement where she lived no longer existed. It had been demolished to make way for a new building. For a moment, she felt lost, but then she took a deep breath. "I didn't come to seek what I lost. I came to plant what I learned." With the money she saved from volunteer work and a little help from Daniel, she rented an old, abandoned, cracked warehouse. She cleaned every corner, painted the walls, and sewed curtains from donated scraps. And so, the Coat of Hope, a community shelter for underprivileged children. The name came naturally. It symbolized what life had given her, warmth in the cold. In the beginning, the shelter had only 3 children and a pot of soup. Sofia cooked, taught, and played with them, like a mother of many hearts. "No one gets cold here," she would say with a smile, as she covered the little ones with used blankets. At night, she wrote letters to Ricardo and Daniel, but never sent them. She wanted success to come not from pity, but from merit. Difficulties soon arose: a lack of resources, late rent, and distrust from neighbors. One day, a storm destroyed part of the roof, and Sofia spent the night holding buckets to contain the leaks. But even exhausted, she maintained her faith. "If God gave me the strength to give away my only coat, He would also give me the strength to protect those in need," she told herself. Over time, the community began to grow closer. Bakeries donated bread, seamstresses offered clothing, neighbors helped with small repairs. The Coat of Hope was no longer just a shelter, It became a home of shared love. And as she watched the sleeping children, Sofia smiled. For the first time, she felt no lack of anything. The cold that once hurt her was now the same cold that warmed the world. Time passed, and the Casaco de Esperanza shelter became a small beacon of light in the community. Children arrived every day, some hungry, some lost, all in need of affection. Sofia worked tirelessly, sleeping little, living on donations that barely covered her expenses. Still, she maintained her smile and faith. "As long as there's a pot and a heart, no one here will go hungry or cold," she said.
But the following months brought greater challenges. The rent was late, the electricity bill piled up, and donations dwindled. Winter arrived earlier and more cruelly. Sofia tried to hide her despair, but her hands trembled as she counted her coins. At night, when the children slept, she cried silently, staring at the cracked ceiling. "Did I make a mistake, Mom? Is this dream too big for me?" she whispered in the darkness. One morning, the warehouse owner appeared with an impatient look. "I'm sorry, miss, but it's over. I have interested buyers." Sofia tried to argue, begged for more time, but the man just shook his head. He had deadlines, debts, and little empathy. Watching him leave, the world seemed to collapse. The shelter she'd worked so hard to build was about to disappear. Still, she gathered the children together and spoke calmly. "Hope is the last coat we take off, understand? As long as love exists, there will always be shelter." The children, not fully understanding, hugged her, and in that embrace, Sofia felt a small miracle. Even without a roof over their heads, they still felt protected. That night, exhausted, Sofia fell asleep sitting on the floor. When she woke, there was an envelope under the door. Inside was a handwritten letter and enough money to fund the shelter for 3 months. At the bottom, a discreet signature. "An old man, grateful for the warmth you taught me to feel again." It was Ricardo. Sofia brought her hands to her face and wept, not from sadness, but from renewed faith. Ricardo's letter rekindled in Sofia the fire that the cold of life had nearly extinguished. With the money, she repaired the roof, bought food and new clothes for the children. The shelter flourished again. But the true miracle was yet to come. One afternoon, a local reporter, captivated by Sofia's story, decided to write a story about the coat of hope. She took photos, listened to testimonials, and wrote from the heart. The report went viral. Within days, donations began arriving from all over the country. Business people, artists, and ordinary people sent clothes, toys, and money. Sofia was surprised, confused, and moved. "It wasn't the money that saved the shelter. It was the people," she said in an interview. Her words touched thousands of hearts. Ricardo, upon seeing the news on television, smiled with tears in his eyes. "She did it," he murmured proudly. Daniel, now an adult, decided to look for her. When he appeared at the shelter's gate, Sofia ran and hugged him tightly. "I knew you would come," she said. He replied, "Where there is hope, there is always a way back." Since then, Daniel has helped her manage the shelter, dedicating himself to the same cause. Over time, the shelter grew and gained national recognition. Sofia began to be invited to lectures and events, but she never left the ground that supported her. She continued to clean tables, serve soup, and tuck children in on cold nights. For her, true success was seeing the little ones smile. The love we give always comes back in some way.
One night, as she looked up at the sky, Sofia felt the cold wind caress her face. "Mom, I did it," she whispered, her heart light. High above, a star seemed to shine brighter, and for the first time, Sofia realized that the cold no longer hurt,
because within her, love had become an eternal flame. The sun rose timidly over the neighborhood, tinting the simple walls with golden hues. The Casaco do Esperanza shelter was now known throughout the city. Children played in the courtyard, volunteers came and went, and Sofia watched from afar, with the same serene smile of someone who knows that love has conquered time. There were wrinkles on her face, but her eyes continued to shine as when it all began, with the same fire of someone who believes in good. That cold morning, a new child arrived. She was a thin girl with a frightened look and torn clothes. Her hair was tangled and her feet were bare, just like Sofia had once been. "Are you cold?" she asked, crouching down. The girl nodded silently. Sofia looked around and saw an old woolen coat draped over the chair, the same one she had once given to little Daniel all those years ago. Without hesitation, she took the coat from the hanger and draped it over the girl's shoulders. "Now you'll be warm," she said, repeating the same words that had changed her destiny. The little girl smiled shyly and hugged her. Sofia closed her eyes for a moment. It was as if time had come full circle, the beginning and the end meeting in the same gesture. Daniel, now an adult and a partner at the shelter, watched from afar. He saw the scene and felt a lump in his throat. "She's still the same," he thought. "With each passing day, I grew more in awe of the woman who had transformed her own pain into healing for the world." Sofia, unknowingly, inspired not only children, but everyone she came across, the kind of kindness that spreads without fanfare. That night, after putting the children to bed, Sofia walked into the garden. The cold wind brushed her face, but she felt no discomfort. Looking up at the sky, she saw a shooting star streak across the horizon. "Thank you, Mom. Thank you, Ricardo. The shelter is safe now," she whispered. And in that moment, she felt as if every person she had ever loved was still there, weaving together destiny with invisible threads of love. The years passed, and the coat of hope grew, spreading branches to other cities. Sofia became a symbol of empathy and humanity. When asked how it all began, she would answer simply, "With the cold and a coat lent by faith." Her voice always carried the serenity of someone who understands that the greatest revolutions are born from small gestures. One afternoon, while strolling through the courtyard, Sofia came across a group of young volunteers sewing clothes for the new children. One of them, smiling, asked, "Aunt Sofia, why is the shelter called that?" She smiled, sat down among them, and replied, "Because love is the only coat that never goes out of style." Their soft laughter echoed like music in the air. As the sun set, Sofia closed her eyes and took a deep breath. The cool breeze caressed her face, but inside there was only warmth. She thought of Daniel, Ricardo, Dona Marta, and all the children who had passed through there. She realized that her life had been a circle of kindness, a small gesture that grew to encompass the world.
On the shelter wall, an old photo showed a 14-year-old girl with a coat in her hands and a shy smile. Below, a sign read, "Here was born the coat of hope, where the cold ends and love begins." And so, the cycle was complete. The coat that once warmed a lost boy now warmed generations. Sofia walked among the playing children and looked up at the sky one last time. The breeze seemed to whisper her mother's words, "Daughter, you never needed an inheritance. You became the legacy." The cold ends, but hope doesn't. If this story touched your heart,
leave a like, share it with someone special, and subscribe to the channel. Because here, we believe that a simple gesture can change destinies. And maybe the next code of hope starts with you.